This is Harvard on the Map, presented by the Harvard Graduate School of Design, covering innovative ideas and thought leaders in digital cartography, Earth observation, and all things geospatial, with your host, Jennifer Horowitz.
Hello, and welcome to Harvard on the Map. I'm here with Raj Singh, who is sort of a GIS, all things geo all-star. Your background seems to span the gamut of all of the things within the geospatial arena that I'm interested in, and so I thought it would be great to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah, are you in Cambridge as well?
I'm in Cambridge today. Yep, company I currently work at is down on Memorial Drive.
Oh, wow.
We're in the building, most people think of it as the Microsoft building, but I think we're about half of it.
Yeah, I know exactly where you are. Yeah, absolutely. So to start, I wondered if you could just give a little bit of your background in terms of how you came to be at the current company that you're currently working at, and just the stops along the way.
Sure, it's pretty much a winding road. When I got out of college in '91, well, I guess it goes back a little bit before. I sort of wanted to be out in the field a little bit. I wanted to be out in the in the wilderness. Not really the wilderness, but I wanted a job that didn't keep me behind a desk, which is funny based on where I ended up. But so when I got out of college, I tried to get into environmental consulting. And back then, what's that, 30 years ago now that we're in 2021. Not a lot of people had a lot of computer experience. So I was the young guy, the new young guy at this small environmental consulting firm. And the person I got hired, the person I was going to work for was like leaving in a month to go do his master's in GIS. This is in New Jersey. I think he now like runs GIS in New Jersey or something. So he was a good person, but he left me at that time. It was ArcInfo, Esri's ArcInfo. And at that time they had the big bookshelf. People who go way back, decades, remember the big bookshelf of ArcInfo books, which were terrific documentation. Like every command was a few pages and had references at the end of every command that you could go and read up on, academic references. So I just, that was my first introduction to GIS because I was the computer guy and I fell in love with it. Made a lot of maps and then decided to, everybody I worked with had at least a master's degree. So I decided I needed to go to grad school. And that's how I ended up in the MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning and getting a master's in city planning, and met up with a few people there who actually I went into the PhD program as I was tutoring or TAing a class, met up with a few people who had some really cool ideas, and we ended up starting a company to do web mapping, which was a circuitous route. We had a few other ideas, but the web mapping thing turned out to be the most the most marketable. And so this is back in like '97 now. We started, I think, one of the first web mapping efforts around in the country. And this was before you could actually do web mapping very well. We were using ArcInfo, and there was a product, which I don't know is still around, MapInfo, which was eventually bought by Pitney Bowes. And I don't know what the status of their web stuff is now, but ArcInfo at the time didn't have the ability to generate maps without actually firing up the screen and making the map on the screen and then saving it to a PNG or something, and then sending it out through the web. So in the server room, you'd have a real screen showing all these maps for every request that came in before sending it out. It was definitely not a server-based product. But we struggled along. We made a business out of it for a while, and it didn't totally work out. So I went back and finished my PhD doing a lot of GIS stuff back at the Urban Studies and Planning Department at MIT, and then went to work at the Open Geospatial Consortium doing spatial data standards, which was a lot of fun. Got to travel the world for 10 years and met a lot of really interesting, smart people, and create some web-based data standards that are still around today.
Huh.
But I think I eventually felt like I'd gone about as far as I could go in the pure GIS industry, and wanted to sort of broaden my database information professional career, and took a job at IBM with a startup that was getting acquired by IBM, which was a NoSQL database, which had a lot of spatial functionality. Couldn't really figure out how to sell it and how to position it well. So, that was what I went in there to do. Kind of got caught up in the whole IBM, more in IBM's priorities than in mine. And, I think I spent about 5 years there doing, and it served the purpose for my career, which was to broaden my experience and get much more into AI and machine learning and general web services and databases writ large, with all the exciting things going on at the time with NoSQL versus relational, and how spatial data plays in all those, and big data and all those fun mainstream topics. And that took me to where I am now, a product manager at a database company called InterSystems, which I'm not actually doing anything spatial. We're still pushing to get spatial support into the database product. We're doing more. We're big in healthcare and financial services.
Fascinating. Well, I feel like your journey sort of spans the gamut of GIS history in a sense, just in terms of Open Geospatial Consortium, the work they do around managing geospatial data, and the sort of the legal groundwork there even, and then that's really incredible. I wonder, so did you start as a GIS person and then move towards CS and the broader world, or did you have a CS background and then kind of?
I played around with CS as an undergrad, took a few classes. That was like back in the 80s, where the career path wasn't that clear, and I didn't love it. Like I said, I wanted to be more out in the world. But yeah, working for the Wilderness Society didn't really work out in terms of a good career move. So
Sure.
I think the president at the time was sort of killing the Department of the Interior. So that didn't look like a good career move. And I probably wasn't. Probably made the right choice. But yeah, so then computer science is, I had to pick it up. I don't have a formal computer science background.
That's very fair. It's very inspiring for someone like myself who is coming at CS from a GIS perspective, and I'm kind of having to, or from a data science and then towards CS. It's not my background, but I have to pick up skills as I go, and so learning coding languages is definitely a new piece for me, but definitely essential as well. Yeah,
my degrees are economics and urban planning.
Oh. Yeah. Well, that's very refreshing that you're not doing anything that's even they're somewhat similar, but yeah, that's interesting. Cool. So I wonder, what are the changes that you've noticed within the spatial data world? As you've kind of watched this, you talk about ArcInfo from like the very beginning. I didn't even know that history of there were ArcInfo books where you looked up commands. I didn't know that.
There was a lot of books, like in the tens, maybe 40 books. There was a separate set of books for the 3D modeling, a separate set of books for the mapping, separate set for the database. Yeah, there's a big background on that. Used to not be able to have file names longer than 8 characters because of the Windows history. I might be getting part of that wrong, but yeah, it was a very different world 30 years ago with the.
Yeah. So what are the changes you've noticed as over time, out of genuine curiosity? How have you noticed the way we work with spatial data changing? And you mentioned web mapping in the very beginning after your PhD. What have you seen? How has it transformed in a way as someone who works with geodata?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big heritage of GIS is that it was the first discipline to really tackle the big data problem. Back from the 60s, when GIS was started at Harvard. And that's why that's a blessing and a curse. That's why we still have this lineage of weird file formats. At the time, it was really needed to be able to manage the quantities of data that are inherently spatial. But as the world caught up with us in the 2000s, that became a barrier, I think, to the GIS industry being able to nicely integrate with the mainstream database market. And there are a lot of exceptions. People talk about Oracle has a spatial component. Every major database has some sort of spatial support. But I think, preparing for this interview, I thought about what really has happened. And I think there's a lot of basic spatial functionality in the mainstream databases, but a lot of the sophisticated stuff has never made it there. Like in terms of looking at, real 3D support and looking at volumes or doing the kind of stuff. We do a lot of healthcare, so doing advanced epidemiology type spatial analyses, that stuff you still have to go down to the command line in real GIS to do that kind of real spatial diffusion models and things like that. So yeah, things have changed a lot, but not necessarily so much. The spatial data models have held up really well. All the indexing schemes that were created to make dealing with gigabyte databases were huge, back 25 years ago. And we're able to handle those, and making maps was a really tough GPU and CPU intensive process. And we solved a lot of those problems in the GIS industry early on in a certain way. But I think it's kind of, those solutions topped out. And now there are new things that we may not necessarily be taking advantage of. I think there are some companies out there, I'm not remembering the names, but there are some which are doing some, and they're going to hate me because I forgot their names, but there's some which are doing more GPU-based optimization and preparing their databases better for the kind of, new cutting edge stuff happening in machine learning, which is all GPU and memory based. But yeah, those aren't totally those are definitely not mainstream in the business communities I will work with, currently. Probably, still getting there a little bit in more traditional GIS communities.
Huh. Well, I now have too many questions for you, but you're a busy guy, so I don't want to take up your whole day. But I guess, well, first, in terms of there's so many exciting things going on in terms of geospatial machine learning. You talk about like GPU accelerated machine learning, but like companies like NVIDIA are doing all sorts of really cool work around, identifying particular, objects in satellite imagery, which I think is so cool. And I wondered, how do you think this will change the geospatial arena in terms of this new machine learning layer? And how you think that will change the field?
Yeah, I think I still think the GIS industry is the smartest, best group of people and most innovative in a way. But, along the thread of seeing what happens there is staying there is where I'd like to see it go, is to become more integrated with the cloud services, for these things to become serverless things that you can just tie into. A lot of what we're doing here is figuring out how we have an old school database as well. And our company is a lot like Esri in a way. It's still privately held. The founder is still running it. A lot of success in the past. Why change a lot of stuff? But we're trying to go to the cloud in a bigger way and figure out how we as a data platform company can integrate more with other services out there, and not having spatial functionality right now in the database. As I mentioned, I'd love to have a suite of really cool services I can attach to and create new software offerings based on those things. So, if we have a really fast database, we're storing a lot of data and we're providing really great transactional access to it, but maybe I want to send all that off to get to do some, well, obviously COVID has been really big since we have a big healthcare business this year, but maybe I want to, do some cluster analysis and send that off to a service and be able to offer our hospital customers or our research labs the ability to just deploy this on the cloud. You can run clusters really fast and get it back and make reports and things like that.
Interesting.
And there are a lot, probably much more advanced, you know, if I had more time, much more advanced examples I could think of. But I would love to see, you know, I would say I think Esri is probably, if I was going to their developer conference again, which I haven't been to in a few years, I think they are offering a lot of serverless components and capabilities, but they haven't sort of broken through to just be in an Azure marketplace or a AWS marketplace and just easily be able to buy and integrate with another database. So I guess it's more of the holistic business, the business processes around the technology, which I'd like to see evolve.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you, and I appreciate talking to another Geo Cambridge community member, and so finally, I like to end all of my my interviews with the same question, which is to describe a time where you were lost, either in your own career or geographically, and how you found your way back again.
Well, I remember one time working for Open Geospatial Consortium, landing in the Rome airport, not knowing any Italian, on a Sunday night in a highly Catholic place where everything closes on Sundays, and trying to figure out how to get from that airport to my hotel.
Got it.
And yeah. I can't remember if I had a cell phone at the time, or if I probably had a cell phone, but not access to that network. So Google Maps was not an option.
Right. Fair. Well, I've definitely been there. I think that's partly what's inspired my love of maps, is because I often get lost myself. So I've been there. Yeah.
So I went the human route and just went out on the street, and you find a taxi cab driver who looks reliable and trust him to get you where you need to go.
Well, that works. That definitely works. Yeah. Before Google Maps were just people, you would ask for directions. Yes. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And hope they're not going to drive you all over town.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Totally. Well, I really appreciate meeting you, and it's lovely to meet a fellow, Cambridge, building that Harvard MIT connect, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I hope in the new year that we can get our meetups going again here in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Raj.
Okay, thanks. See ya.